We have heard from you, Jordi, about the vulnerable groups that suffer a lot from the crisis. You have been talking about Roma, you have been talking about other groups that are endangered, that are under huge pressure. Marian, what would you say? Would you share these interpretation of vulnerable groups when it comes to the consequences of social crisis? Can we still be as clear about who is vulnerable and who is not, especially after what we've seen from your film?
I believe we can't. I in no way want to diminish the situation that the Roma or AIDS patients or refugees are in. These are absolutely dramatic circumstances, and I fully agree your points that we need to act on that, and we need to keep an eye on that, because it is threatening what we are and how we identify as a society. But actually, in the film, we came from a totally different perspective. We looked at people who were employed, who had previous work history, who were educated, who were very eloquent, who had a personal, stable situation, were not addicted in any way, did not have tremendous personal problems, and yet in some way were much, much more vulnerable than they reasonably should be, given their place in society. We also specifically wanted to look at wealthier countries. The documentary was entirely made in the United Kingdom and Germany on several different protagonists. We did not look at the disaster zones of this crisis, and yet what we kept finding also in our research is that these people were so much more vulnerable, that they were living in a hidden homelessness situation, and even when they were not, or people in the vicinity of that, were so much more at risk to become a victim of precarious housing situations. Our interpretation of this is that this is a canary in the coal mine phenomenon, where this can serve as an indication for the general wealth of society, of the middle class, and of how they have been affected by the crisis. So what I would say is our values in society, they're absolutely true. We should be in defense of them, but not just in defense of the weak, but in defense of the strength of the entire grid. I don't know if that would be good. Yeah?
Yeah, that's I think that gives your point perfectly well. Jordi, from the work you have done and from the cities you have, or the development of cities you have observed, would you somehow share this interpretation that it's the middle class that is now as much under pressure as the, let's say, previous or the traditional vulnerable groups that we know? Is that something you would share, or would you like to disagree on that?
No, I couldn't agree more. We actually have realized that, for example, we've focused for many years on Muslims in European cities. We are now conducting a research which is about the neighbors of these Muslims. And what we find is that the grievances they have are so similar. The difficulties they face are so similar. Things that we thought of as discrimination before, we're realizing that they're not just about discrimination, about marginality and exclusion. And those who are at risk of exclusion and marginality are growing exponentially, not only in Southern and Eastern Europe, everywhere. So I agree completely that the middle classes are threatened, and the cuts in welfare are affecting very wide sections of population. What's happening is not so much that the vulnerable groups are no longer important. It's just the range of who's vulnerable has expanded to a really broad cross-section of our population.
Yes, I agree.
And this will, of course, also influence, I think, the work of us as the work we do as foundations. I mean, you have mentioned it in your speech, Jordi, that foundations are flexible and we can tackle problems as they emerge. And maybe the analysis of what is happening in cities, in urban societies now, will also lead us foundations to somehow reshape our work and adjust to the current developments. Marian, one question to you that is particularly linked to cities and the phenomenon of hidden homelessness and social crisis. You have shot the documentary in Birmingham and in London and in German cities. And you are a citizen of London. How do you see the consequences of the social crisis, not only necessarily in a negative way, but maybe there are also some positive aspects you could observe in your neighborhood? Could you give us some feedback, some impressions on that?
Definitely. Well, what I have seen is that in this may be a secondary factor that is not being paid much attention to. But when you look at the concept of solidarity that politicians have been trying to vocalize and trying to design and press and make policy decisions around and had difficulty bringing to life, this is something you now start seeing amongst the young population in the big cities, where it's far too expensive for someone of my age, of just a few years of working experience, to live on their own. So what you end up seeing is people of very different nationalities sharing apartments, sharing houses together, and feeling fairly comfortable with that situation. It is what their economic circumstances allow, but it's also becoming very much part of the organic feeling of living in big cities these days. It's not just London, it's also Berlin, it's also Paris, it's various other cities in Europe, where this is becoming more and more the standard, and where you have to keep in mind that there will be an entire generation of young, educated, successful people in young cities who start their lives out this way, who spend their first 3, 4, 5 years in this situation. I myself live in a house with a Nigerian, Sri Lankan, a Romanian, and a British person, and I love it, because this is Europe to me. This is that kind of inclusion and that kind of cultural diversity that makes it worth living in a city and living the life of a mobile European. But keep in mind that as well, that this will influence the discourse and that this might become a bit of a clash with a generation that is not used to this.
Jordi, you are a citizen of Barcelona. Would you also share this impression or similar impressions from the city you live in? Is there this kind of development, or is it really like the more, as we have said in the introduction, that Barcelona has been on the forefront of social protests ever since the crisis has emerged? How do you observe this development in your, may I call it, hometown, or the town of your residence?
Well, the fact that there's a culture of protest, which, by the way, is not only in Barcelona. I mean, you could find it in many other Spanish cities. It's actually one symptom of solidarity more than anything else. I think one of the wonderful things about what has happened in Spain is that poor people have not turned one against each other. If you consider that Spain has had almost 6.5 million people come in 12 years, and after that, you had unemployment go from 8 to 27% in 3.5 years. And we don't have major cases of community confrontations. You'll see that there is some ways in which society is coming together and is refusing to blame their neighbors for their faith. And that is, I think, something which cannot be taken for granted. And I keep telling the Spanish foundations, and those of the Spanish foundations who are here have heard me say this before, we cannot just sleep until the day this is broken. And the same thing for Portugal. We cannot just wait until it happens. But this kind of everyday solidarity happens all over the place. And you have markets without money, for example, springing in every neighborhood in Barcelona, where people just go and exchange goods. And it doesn't have to be young people, international, and very fancy. It can be very simple families or retired people who go there.
Yes.
So I think that was a good kind of bridge to the Spanish case study we have, to the second Spanish case study we have on stage. Andrea, I have already been mentioning that you are currently living in Ronda, and you are working for an institution there that is very much involved in cultural affairs, cultural policy matters. So talking about the connection between civil society and the public sector, what is your view on this, let's say, how we call it, public-private partnership, from the experiences or from what you have observed in Ronda and from some citizens platform you have been involved in? So could you just give us some thoughts from the, may I call it, Spanish province?
Ronda is quite I would say, a small city or a very large town, and it suffered from the usual decline these kind of town suffer economically. It had the massive loss of its very small specialized industries in the 80s, and it opted for a model that was very popular in Spain, as I'm sure Jordi will know, which is real estate speculation, our national sport. So once that collapsed, the Ronda City Hall realized that the only thing it had left was its historical patrimony and its cultural heritage, and that tourism, especially high-end cultural tourism, could arise from that. That's why the Ronda City Hall decided to become a UNESCO World Heritage candidate. A civil society platform had existed during the speculation years that wanted Ronda to be a candidate for the UNESCO, and at that time the City Hall was not interested at all because it was too busy building California-style suburban homes. So when the City Hall gained a sudden interest in this project that would bring in longer stay tourism and that would really spur the cultural industry, which is really a growing industry in Europe, we had a meeting with them, and the first thing we asked them was this: when do you plan on approving the Special Urban Protection Plan? The Special Urban Protection Plan, as you can imagine, is a set of rules that protect cultural heritage that is under threat. And their answer was, you are right, it is of the absolute utmost importance to us. And it had been that way for 7 years. I later learned that they were hesitant on that plan because they were thinking about approving a plan for a new, very modern hotel at the heart of our medieval old city. So for me, the trade-off is quite clear. It's short-termism and long-termism. And I think the role civil society can play in this is standing for the long term. The media cycle has absorbed the political cycle, and so politicians look for a quick influx of cash, especially in these times of crisis, and they forget the long play, where I think civil societies, by nature, look for long-term payoffs and long-term objectives, really much like the European Foundation Statute project that was discussed here. So I think the role civil society has to play is represent the long term and stand for the long term in a world that is increasingly about running the immediate.
But to a certain extent, Andrea, that somehow is the opposite of at least part of what we've heard from you, Jordi. You have said civil society can be quick, and we can step in, and we can give loans, and we can act on a short-term basis in order to help to overcome the crisis. What would you say about this long-termism and short-termism of civil society in relationship to what we've just heard from Andrea? Would be interesting.
Well, I'd say this is this may sound paradoxical, but these are our two advantages, right? And you have to play both. And let me bring it to a very close example to me. The Open Society Initiative for Europe's headquarters are in the middle of an area of Barcelona called Al Raval. This is a very small place, but it is the poorest area in the city. Life expectancy is 10 years less than in the richest areas of the city. It's the most multicultural area, more than 50% foreign born. Thanks to the long-run perspective, there is a fantastic social tissue that has brought together this area. And despite the crisis, and this being an area of high street prostitution, high drug use, and all this, despite all of that, there's no problems in living together in Raval. That's thanks to our long-term perspective. At the same time, the other reason there has not been a major problem in the area is because the short-term emergencies have been very quickly addressed by the foundations and by the civil society. And the combination of the two is what explains that the situation has not exploded. It's not enough to have a long-term vision, but it's useless to have small interventions if you don't have this long-term knowledge of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's right. Andrea, you would like to come in on that?
Yeah, when I was speaking about a long-term perspective, I'm not saying that civil society can't play the band-aid role, which is, I think, more or less the metaphor you used in your speech. But you can't put a band-aid if you're sick. You have to go to the doctor at some point. So it's a good thing that civil society plays an immediate role for relief, but civil society cannot replace the role of the state, especially in health services and social affairs. It can do an immediate relief work, but the situation cannot stay that way forever. That's where I think the long-term expertise of civil society comes in to help the public sector out of the crisis, to remove the band-aid and just go to the doctor.
I think it's very important, yeah. I think that is a very important point you've just mentioned, because one of the things we as foundations are seeing at the moment is that with the crisis growing, more and more people and institutions and public institutions as well are kind of queuing in front of the doors of foundations in order to step in and to take over on services that the government and the state can't provide anymore. So, Jordi, what would you say when it comes to taking this into account, what would be your prospect for public-private partnerships, with the state having less and less money and the foundations having the need to step in wherever they can, but we have just heard we can't do everything the state is obliged or to do. So what would be your perspective on that?
Well, there's two answers to that, which is, one is, do we know what the state will be doing in 5 years' time? And that's a very difficult one. But the answer cannot be inaction. The answer cannot be we don't want to do that and we do nothing. The other answer is, I think the way in which we, for example, are reconciling this in Greece, where we are very active, is very clear. We are not there to substitute the Greek state or the EU institutions and EU solidarity, which should come very quickly, in my opinion. We are there to build in civil society the resistance, the elements, the awareness that they need in order to come back and change priorities. And that is the difference between what you call Band-Aid and transformational philanthropy, which knows what it's doing, where it's acting. So it's not so much about the people that get access or the people that get vaccines, as the fact that you're creating in Greek society this capacity, and in particular that you're supporting this capacity where it's existing and rapidly disappearing because of the very fluid situation. I mean, we're talking about a country where extremely needed services like orphanages are about to close or have closed already because of this lack of support.
That gives us a good opportunity to bring in the third case study we have on stage. That is Theodora from Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki, as I said before, has already been mentioned quite a couple of times today. Theodora, we have heard that many of the social problems, many of the consequences of the social crisis are somewhat concentrated in Athens. How do you look at the social crisis as a citizen of a city that is not the capital of Greece, but that is, you told me before, that is the cultural capital of city, but definitely a major city of Greece, but not the capital. So how would you say, what are the consequences of the social crisis for the city, and what do citizens do about it?
Thessaloniki is one of the oldest and most multi-ethnic cities in Europe. This past says a lot about the city, and it was a thriving economy and a thriving society, which is something that has obviously changed the last years. Of course, the similarities with Athens are not that many. The problem in Athens, I think it's out of control now. Thessaloniki as a smaller scale city, I think it's a good example that somehow deals with some problems, which is a positive step. I think that the civil society in Thessaloniki is quite active, and I think you know that better than other people. I mean, here maybe it's not that well known, but citizens are so well organized with initiatives. They give common meals, they organize open markets, shop not shop events. They take care of each other, of their neighborhoods. They plant trees everywhere. Of course, they cannot substitute the state, they cannot substitute the municipality, but at the same time, they cannot wait for the end of the crisis. We don't know when it's going to come, and we cannot wait for the state that has maybe some important negotiations to do before to come and drop in our neighborhoods. Solidarity is also a hot potato in Greece because for me, you have solidarity of inclusion and you have solidarity of exclusion as well. It doesn't mean that solidarity is always a good thing, because we have some examples of exclusion, and I'm talking about Golden Dawn's presence in many public spaces, that they give only meals to Greek people, they exclude everybody else, they organize blood donations for Greek blood owners. And I think this is some things we don't have to skip, because solidarity can be also something negative if we don't pay so much attention to that.
That's very important that you aspect this double-sided phenomenon of solidarity. It's not always necessarily something entirely positive, especially when it comes to the populist movements and to xenophobia, which you've just mentioned. Maybe let's use the last minutes of our panel discussion to talk a bit about that. How, to what extent do you think, starting with Thessaloniki maybe, do populist movements somehow profit from the social crisis because they step in and they provide services and give the population the feeling that they are doing something good for them? Is this a kind of, can we see an increase of populism and xenophobia in certain cities and populists benefiting from the situation? Would you say that?
I would like to say that for Golden Dawn, we have populism, extremism, and racism, all in one, in a terrible package, that there are several things packed together, which is very hard to face. And many people feel identified with this, because if you are desperate, of course, you search for easy solutions. Recent polls showed that 20% of people would vote for something, would not be necessarily democratic if this would give a solution to some of their everyday problems. I find this percentage quite frightening, I would say. 20%, it's not something you cannot really see. And there are people among us, I mean our friends, our neighbors, that wouldn't imagine that they would vote for this party. I believe, maybe I'm mistaken, I'm not right, but I never thought that some of the people in my surroundings would vote for the far-right party. Of course, they are benefited from the crisis. Of course, the crisis gives some nice opportunities to these initiatives that were there, but we wouldn't see them before if we didn't have these circumstances now. I think
maybe
we
with
should
a specific relationship to cities and, let's say, the decline of welfare and services in cities. That's what I would like to focus on. Is that something you can see in Thessaloniki as well?
In Thessaloniki, these initiatives are not that common, because I think the society, the civil society, is more active, and they don't leave that space for Golden Dawn, for example. I think that in Athens, that the city is huge, that you cannot really control anything. They really find their way to go in neighborhoods and organize themselves perfectly, which is an everyday habit there. You can see them intervene in many different cases, helping people from going to the bank with no fear and take their salary or their pension, for example, even giving food, even paying some bills that they cannot afford. So I think Thessaloniki still has control of that.
Jordi, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah,
a bit?
I just want to say something which is really important about this kind of, let's say, charity, you know, from Golden Dawn and others. I mean, people are not stupid, and they realize that distributing oranges in the Syntagma Square once every 3 months is not solving anything. Right? Some people may go and play this game for a minute because they're very angry with government, because they do fear for their physical integrity, because of many other reasons. But you all work in social work, or many of these foundations here work in social work. You know how difficult it is. You know how difficult it is to actually solve problems. It's very easy to go and distribute, you know, some kind of food, or just have doctors with borders, as they call them, and these kind of things. But to run a polyclinic every day and then give you treatment, not today and then you go home, but today and in 1 week and then every time you need it, that's a very different story. So the good thing is that this can also backfire. Because if you promise a lot and you're unable to deliver as they are, that's the case. But the other thing that is meant here is that that's also why standing by the poverty-struck Greek cities now is not only an issue of band-aid solidarity, it is also an issue of values. You're proving that it can be done in another way, without exclusions, without insults, without asking for the Greek identity card. It can also be done. And just by doing this, you're making a hugely important political statement.
Thank you very much on that. That was very much about what foundations and let's say institutions can do. I would like to have a very quick round on what citizens and cities and their citizens can do about meeting the social crisis. And I would be interested to hear, for example, a quick statement from Marian, because we've now been talking again a lot about the so-called crisis countries. What do you think, what needs to be done looking from your perspective as a citizen of London and having been to Birmingham? And so what is at stake and what can civil society do? What is your idea about that?
I would say very quickly and very simply, because of course this is a complex issue, but first of all, take ownership of the communication about itself. London defines itself as a multicultural city where there are opportunities, where everyone can really strive for itself, not necessarily in an American way, but in a very, very British way. It took ownership of the way it's defined, and I think Europe at this moment is being dragged in a narrative of crisis, and it has no ownership about the way the European ideal is communicated. And this is something where civil society, but also the foundations and then definitely the political parties should step up and say, no, this is what it's about, these are problems, these are solutions, but ultimately the end goal and what we're about is this specific statement. Now we're being dragged in a turmoil of crisis, which is not necessarily what this was ever to be identified with.
Thank you. And then Andrea, from your experience of the civil society platform you have described, I mean, obviously that was a kind of a more negative example because it didn't work out at the end. But still, you as a citizen of Rwanda, would you see perspectives for the civil society in your town to tackle the social crisis? Is there hope?
Actually, for the civil society, no, there's no room at all in Rwanda. And I think that's because of the political
Okay, there's
class.
no hope, sorry.
No, there's no hope, yeah, we're doomed. It depends on the political context, specifically in Rwanda, where you have a coalition between populists, local regional populists and conservatives. There's very little room, especially when you're working with populists. Populists really don't like civil society. It's not their thing because civil societies are the voice of a society they are trying to shape. So working on that basis, it's already difficult. I do see hope because I see new models of solidarity emerging. Jordi, you mentioned that the poor help the poor more. There's a local TV show in the regional TV channel where people with serious economic welfare problems, for example, 2 kids, 1 discapacitated kids, 2 parents with no jobs, call, and people can call in and donate money or donate food or donate their skills as a mason to build a house, pretty much anything at all. And what you see is that the wide majority of people who call to help are often unemployed or have a very low pension. So the weak help the weak, and I think social cohesion is growing because of that. It's not like the working class identity of the 60s, it's something else, but it's something.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists, and I think it was a very inspiring debate. I'm not exactly sure that we have solutions for all the challenges to tackle, but at least what I take home with me is that we as foundations, we are needed to be flexible, to adapt, to react to the situation, but we can count on the power, I would say, of civil society, because what we have heard from all the panelists is that there are very strong forces in the different communities, in the societies, that somehow step in and provide assistance when the situation, when times get rough. And I think we have a couple of topics to tackle for the next EFC conference that is on rethinking Europe. I think after this plenary, not only we as foundations have to rethink, but also we as Europeans have to rethink our own strategies and performances. Thank you very much to all of you.